Ethan Carter had everything most people only dream of: an estate tucked away in the hills of San Diego, a fortune built from 3 generations of legacy, and a name that commanded instant respect in elite circles. He was the kind of man who never had to raise his voice to be heard or lift a finger unless he chose to. But beneath that polished exterior, behind the designer suits and sleek black cars, was a man hiding something no one in his world would ever expect. He had fallen in love with his maid. Her name was Grace. Grace Walker, 26. Quiet, soft-spoken, and devastatingly kind. She moved through the Carter household like a whisper, always on time, always neat, never making a scene. Ethan had hired her 2 years ago after his previous housekeeper retired, and at first, she had been just another face in the background. But then something changed. Something shifted the moment he saw her humming softly to herself as she arranged fresh lilies in the foyer one rainy afternoon. He didn't know why, but that small moment stayed with him. He tried to brush it off, told himself it was nothing. A momentary lapse. A man like him had no business noticing a woman like her. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. And the more he tried to ignore it, the deeper he fell. Her laugh, which she always tried to stifle when around him, echoed in his thoughts like a melody. Her compassion toward his elderly mother, who had recently moved in, left him stunned. No guest, no family member had ever been so gentle. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was longing.
And it terrified him.
You see, men like Ethan weren't supposed to feel this way. He had a fiancée once, Jessica Matthews, a woman who was bred for high society. But Jessica had walked out when she realized Ethan refused to prioritize appearances over sincerity. Since then, Ethan had vowed to focus solely on his business. Love was a distraction until Grace. But how do you confess something like this to someone who sees herself as nothing more than a servant in your home? Someone who never dares to make eye contact too long, afraid she might overstep an invisible line? Ethan knew the risk. He could shatter her trust, embarrass her, or worse, destroy her peace. And yet, the more he stayed silent, the more unbearable it became. So one evening, after returning home early from a business trip, he saw her in the kitchen, her hands covered in flour, baking his mother's favorite bread without being asked. The sight hit him like a wave. It wasn't grand. It wasn't glamorous. But it was real. And at that moment, he knew he couldn't hide it any longer. He walked in. She turned, surprised. "Mr. Carter, I didn't expect you back till tomorrow," she said, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. "Call me Ethan, please," he said, voice lower than usual. Grace blinked. "Okay, Ethan," she replied cautiously. He looked at her, really looked. "There's something I've been wanting to say to you for a long time, and I need you to hear it." That's when her hands stopped moving. Her smile faded just slightly, and the air in the room turned heavier than stone. What she said after that would leave Ethan completely speechless and flip his entire world on its head. Ethan hadn't planned it. There was no grand speech rehearsed, no perfect setting or a romantic gesture. Just the truth, raw and unpolished, waiting to be said. But when Grace looked at him with those calm, unreadable eyes, all the confidence he'd built in boardrooms and business meetings evaporated. He took a step closer. "I think about you more than I should," Ethan said, the words escaping before he could second-guess them. "And I know how it sounds. I know this isn't typical. But I had to say it. Grace, I'm in love with you." She didn't react the way he expected. No tears. No smile. Just a strange, quiet stillness that wrapped around her like armor. She placed the bowl of dough carefully on the counter and looked away, her jaw tight. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" Ethan asked, stepping closer. "Because it's inappropriate? Because I'm the man who pays your salary?" She shook her head, arms crossed. "Because once you say something like that, it changes everything. And people like me, we don't get fairy tales, Ethan." He felt like the air had been knocked out of him. "People like you?" he repeated. "Grace, I don't see you that way." "I know you don't. Not now," she said softly. "But that's the problem. Someday you will." When the pressure from your friends or family starts to get louder. When your board members start questioning your judgment. When the tabloids get wind of it. There was a heaviness in her tone, like she wasn't just talking from fear, but experience. Has this happened before? Ethan asked carefully. She hesitated, then gave a quiet nod. Not like this. But I've been in rooms where I wasn't supposed to speak. Relationships where I was reminded of my place. You start thinking love is real until they remember who you are. And then you become a stain they have to scrub off their reputation. Ethan swallowed hard. This was more than class. This was trauma. But it only made him more certain. Grace, I'm not going to do that to you. I know you don't believe me yet, but… She cut him off gently, her voice steady. It's not about belief, Ethan. It's about consequences. For the next few days, they barely spoke. Grace kept her routine the same, waking early, preparing breakfast, tending to the house, caring for his mother, Margaret. But the warmth in her presence was dimmed, like a candle shielded behind glass. Ethan, for his part, didn't push. He needed to understand her fears before he could prove he wasn't another rich man playing a fantasy. One afternoon, Ethan sat with his mother in the garden, watching Grace tend to the lavender beds. She's special, isn't she? Margaret said, sipping her tea. Ethan turned. You see it too? Margaret smiled, knowingly. She listens more than she talks. That's rare. But she's guarded, like someone who's learned to carry her pain in silence. Ethan nodded. I told her how I felt. She didn't exactly reject me, but she didn't accept it either. Good, Margaret said. That means she's thinking. A woman who gives you an answer too quickly hasn't thought about what it'll cost her. Do you think I'm making a mistake? He asked. No, she said firmly. But if you want a woman like Grace, you'll have to earn her trust, not buy it. That night, Ethan stayed up late in his study, thinking about everything. He realized how easy his life had been when it came to relationships. Everything had been convenient, partnerships arranged through social circles, women who cared more about his last name than his heart. But Grace was different. She wasn't looking for wealth. She was looking for safety, respect, and honesty. Things her past hadn't given her. And so, Ethan made a decision. The next morning, Grace walked into the living room to find a single envelope on the table. Her name was written on it in Ethan's handwriting. Curious, she opened it and found two things inside, a handwritten letter and a photo of a small house in upstate New York. The letter read, Grace, I know you don't trust what I feel yet. And I don't blame you. But I'm not going to keep loving you in secret or in silence. This isn't a game to me. I've asked my board for a 6-month sabbatical. I'm stepping away from the company to live simply, somewhere quiet. I'd like to take that time to get to know you, not as your employer, but as a man who truly sees you. If you're willing to come with me, even just for a visit, I'll be waiting. No pressure. No expectations. Just honesty. Ethan. Grace held the letter in trembling hands. She read it twice. Then again. No one had ever made space for her like this before. Not without asking for something in return. But even now, 1,000 voices rang in her head, warning her, doubting, second-guessing. Was this real? Could she trust him? What she didn't know was that this letter would set off a chain of events that would unravel not just her past, but his as well. 3 days passed before Grace responded. Ethan had almost given up hope, telling himself that maybe her silence was her answer. But on the 4th morning, as he stepped into the kitchen, there she was, standing by the window, suitcase at her feet, her fingers wrapped nervously around the strap of her bag. I'm not promising anything, she said before he could speak. But I'm willing to see if you're serious. He didn't say a word, just walked over, took the suitcase, and smiled. The cabin in upstate New York was nothing like the lavish estate they'd left behind. It was quiet, nestled between pine trees and hills, surrounded by nothing but birdsong and the occasional wind brushing through branches. There was no staff, no expectations, just 2 people in a space that forced honesty. And for the first time, Grace began to relax. They cooked together, took long walks, talked for hours under stars. Ethan told her about his childhood, the loneliness, the pressure to succeed, the fear of failure. Grace, in turn, opened up about her father, a man who vanished when she was 8, and her mother, who cleaned hotel rooms until her hands gave out. "I've always felt disposable," Grace admitted one night. "Like people only see what I can do for them, not who I am." Ethan didn't try to fix it. He just listened. And that, more than anything, made her feel seen. But just when things seemed to be turning, just when she started to believe, everything changed. One morning, while Ethan was out getting groceries in the nearby town, Grace heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, a woman stood there. Blonde, tall, perfectly dressed in designer boots and a tailored coat. She looked Grace up and down with a half-smile. "You must be Grace," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "I'm Vanessa, Ethan's ex-fiancée." Grace blinked, frozen. "I'm sorry, what?" Vanessa laughed lightly, brushing past her. "He didn't tell you?" "Oh, honey, we were together for 3 years. Practically married. I guess he forgot to mention the ring." Grace's stomach turned. "Why are you here?" "I came to warn you," Vanessa said, now casually examining the rustic living room. "Ethan does this. He plays savior. Finds a woman with a tragic story, makes her feel special. And then, when the reality sets in, when the headlines start to stir, he runs. Or worse, he blames you for the fallout." "That's not the Ethan I know." "Isn't it?" Vanessa smiled. "He used to tell me the same stories, about how he didn't care what people thought. But the moment the board got wind of us, when they started saying I was beneath his brand, he distanced himself, said we needed a break. And then, silence." Grace clenched her fists. "If you're trying to scare me, I'm trying to save you," Vanessa said, her voice sharp now. "You think you're different. I thought I was different too." And with that, she left. No goodbye. No explanation. Just a storm, she dropped into the middle of Grace's fragile peace. When Ethan returned, he found Grace sitting on the front porch, her eyes hollow. "You didn't tell me about her," she said flatly. Ethan froze. "Who?" "Vanessa. Your fiancée." He sighed, setting the bags down. "She was. Years ago. We ended things long before I met you. She said you ended it because the board didn't approve of her." "She's twisting it," he said quickly. "They did pressure me, yes. But it wasn't just that. She wanted the spotlight. She liked being part of the brand. I wanted something real." Grace looked at him, hard. "And now you've found someone who wants nothing to do with your world, and suddenly, that's what makes it real." He stepped closer. "Grace, don't do this. Don't let her poison what we've built." But she was already walking away, disappearing into the cabin. That night, she didn't speak to him. The next morning she was gone. No note. No explanation. Just an empty room and a silence that cut deeper than any words. Back in the city, Ethan spiraled. Days passed without contact. He called, texted, even showed up at her friend's apartment. No answer. Until one evening, a manila envelope arrived at his door. Inside, a newspaper clipping and a birth certificate. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearance of CEO's Former Maid Sparks Investigation." He scanned the article. It was dated 7 years ago. Different city. Different CEO. A man named Charles Langford. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. The birth certificate was even more disturbing. It belonged to a child named Noah Langford. Father, Charles Langford. Mother, Grace Hart. The pieces fell together in seconds, and none of it made sense. Grace had a child? With Charles Langford? Why hadn't she ever mentioned this? And more importantly, what happened to the child? Desperate for answers, Ethan tracked down one of his old journalist contacts. Within days, the truth began to unravel. Grace hadn't just been a maid at Langford's estate. She had been involved in a legal battle against him. A custody fight. A scandal that mysteriously vanished from the media. And then silence. The child was never located. The case was sealed. What Ethan discovered next shook him to his core. Charles Langford died 6 years ago in what was ruled an accident. But rumor had it, the case was far more sinister. Insiders hinted at cover-ups, suppressed documents, gag orders. And Grace? She vanished from public view shortly after. Changed her name, moved cities, took up jobs under the radar, until she walked into Ethan's mansion. She wasn't just a maid. She was a woman running from something, no, someone. And now she was gone again. But this time, Ethan wasn't going to let her disappear. Ethan didn't sleep for days. The moment he found out about Grace's past, about the child, about Langford, he couldn't stop replaying every interaction they'd ever had. The fear in her eyes when she first met him, the way she hesitated to trust, the silence when he asked about her family. It all made sense now. She wasn't hiding from him. She was hiding from a world that had already broken her once. And yet, the question still haunted him. Where was Noah? The answer came unexpectedly. Through his journalist contact, Ethan got access to a leaked court file. Inside it was a confidential report from Child Protective Services. It was brief, but one sentence stood out. Mother claims child was taken by Mr. Langford during a private settlement. Child's whereabouts unknown.
Taken.
That one word gutted Ethan. Langford, the man who used his wealth to crush anyone beneath him, had stolen her child, and somehow, no one had done a damn thing about it. Ethan slammed his fists against the desk, rage coursing through him. This wasn't just about a failed romance.
It was about justice.
It was about finding the truth Grace had been denied, and bringing her son home. He called in favors, hired a private investigator, started digging through offshore adoption records, sealed court documents, and anonymous tips from Langford's former employees. And then, a breakthrough. A nurse from a private pediatric clinic in Connecticut came forward. She remembered a boy named Noah Langford. Dark curls. Quiet. Intelligent. He'd been brought in regularly by a woman who never spoke, only handed over a prepaid medical card and left without a word. The boy was healthy, but always looked sad. The nurse had assumed it was just a custody situation, until the visits suddenly stopped 5 years ago. I always wondered what happened to him, she whispered. He was about 5 when they disappeared. Ethan followed the thread. Found the name on the medical account. Lila Monroe. A fake identity, but connected to a P.O. box in upstate New York, just 2 towns over from the cabin he and Grace had stayed in. His chest tightened. She had brought him there for a reason. It wasn't just a random getaway. It was close to her son. Maybe she had hoped to see him. Maybe she already had. Ethan drove to the address that day, adrenaline pulsing through his veins. The cabin she had stayed in, another rental, was empty, but the mailbox held a letter. Unstamped. Handwritten. It was addressed to Ethan Carter. He ripped it open. Ethan, if you're reading this, then you've found the truth.
Yes.
I had a child.
Noah.
He was taken from me by a man who used money to erase people. When I fought back, they called me unstable. Said I wasn't fit. I had no money. No allies. Just fear. But I never stopped looking. After Langford died, the boy vanished again. Someone else took custody, someone unknown, likely paid off. I've spent the last 6 years trying to track him down. That's why I left. Not because I didn't believe you, but because I knew if you looked deeper, you'd be in danger too. They erased my story once. They won't hesitate to do it again.
Please stop looking.
Don't end up like me, on the run from ghosts with deep pockets and darker secrets. Grace. Ethan sat down on the porch, letters shaking in his hands. He wasn't going to stop. If anything, he was just getting started. Back in the city, he made a bold move. He went public. Using his own media team and platform, he launched a campaign. Where is Noah Langford? It started as a blog post, then a press release, then a full video interview where Ethan laid out the entire story, the sealed documents, the sketchy adoption trail, Grace's disappearance, the suspicious death of Charles Langford. Within 48 hours, the story went viral. News stations picked it up. Social media erupted with hashtags. People from across the country began sharing tips, images, school sightings of a boy who looked just like Grace. But with attention came danger. Ethan's office was broken into. His phones were tapped. One night, A black SUV followed him for 7 blocks before disappearing into the shadows. Still, he didn't stop. Because amid the chaos, a message arrived. From an anonymous email address. Subject line, I know where Noah is. It was a single line. Meet me at the lighthouse on Ridge Point midnight. Come alone. Ethan debated going. It reeked of a trap. But if there was any chance it was real, he had to take it. At exactly midnight, he arrived at the lighthouse. And there she was.
Grace.
Her hair pulled back, her eyes hollow but fierce. You shouldn't have come, she said, voice trembling. Neither should you, Ethan replied. But here we are. She looked down, then handed him a photo. A boy about 10 years old. Curly hair. Big brown eyes. A shy smile. He's alive, she whispered. And he's waiting. Ethan looked at her, heart pounding. Then let's bring him home. The sun was beginning to rise over Ridge Point when Grace finally allowed herself to breathe. For the first time in a decade, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. And she wasn't alone. Ethan stood beside her, watching the waves crash against the rocks, the photo of Noah still clutched in his hand. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full. Full of everything they had been through, everything they had survived, and everything they were about to do next. I thought you'd hate me, Grace finally said, her voice barely audible. Ethan shook his head. I didn't fall in love with a fantasy. I fell in love with you, your strength, your truth, even when it was messy. Grace turned to him, eyes wide. Even after everything? He nodded. Especially after everything. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but this time, it wasn't from pain. It was from release. For so long, she had carried the weight of shame, guilt, and fear. And now she was free. The following weeks moved fast. With Ethan's legal team behind her, Grace reopened the custody case. The press was relentless, but the public was on her side. Mothers across the country rallied around her story, demanding justice not just for her, but for every woman silenced by power and money. The courts finally listened. Investigators traced the boy, Noah, to a private boarding school under an alias, funded by a trust connected to Langford's Shell Corporation. The woman listed as his guardian vanished the day the story hit national news. But Noah, he was safe. When Grace was reunited with her son, the moment broke the internet.
Tears.
Hugs. Silence. Then the words, Mommy, are we going home? Ethan was there too, watching from a distance. And for the first time in his life, the billionaire bachelor didn't care about board meetings or headlines. He cared about this, a woman who had fought harder than anyone he'd ever met. A boy who just wanted his mother. A family that refused to be destroyed. Grace and Noah moved into Ethan's countryside estate for a while. No cameras. No reporters.
Just peace. Healing.
And beginnings. And one day, under the big oak tree in the backyard, Noah asked him a question. Are you going to marry my mom? Ethan laughed. I hope so. And Grace? She smiled. Not because she needed saving, but because, for the first time, she knew she never had to run again. Now it's your turn. Do you believe love can survive lies, pain, and even powerful enemies? Would you fight for someone, even when the world told you to walk away? Let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Ethan's shoes? Or Grace's? Like, share, and subscribe if the story moved you. And remember, sometimes the truth hides in the most unexpected places. But when love is real, it always finds a way back.